Hi, my name is Kevin Thomas, W1DED. Gerry Hull, W1VE, has been a licensed amateur radio operator for nearly 50 years. And as you might imagine, after 50 years, he's got a lot on his ham radio resume. He's an avid and very competitive contester. He's done a lot of de-expeditions to his native Canada, where he holds a Canadian amateur radio license. He's got a particular interest in remote ham radio and understands more technologies than I even knew existed. He was a participant in the WRTC as a referee. It goes on and on. I mean, it's just kind of insane how much he has done within ham radio. And I've been after him for a while to do this conversation, and I'm really pleased that he was able to join me tonight at 8 o'clock. And as I told him before we got started, he'll probably need to come back because there's a lot to get through. Gerry, thank you for joining me.
Well, thank you for having me, Kevin, and glad I could make it.
So I think I'd like to start with K1LZ. It first caught my attention that you were working at that Superstation in Maine, and as you know, I'm located in Maine. And I'm really curious about that particular station and your experience there. I mean, it's pretty much the buzz around the world, what Crossi has done at that station. Tell me about how you got involved and how that particular contest experience looked for you.
Well, it starts many years ago. I first met Crossi when he first came to the U.S. as a mechanical engineer and was working at different companies around Massachusetts. And our good common friend Jim K1IR in Sudbury, Massachusetts, was doing some multi-single contesting. So Crossi came over. So we spent, 2 or 3 contest seasons. He was over maybe 2 or 3 times and got to know him quite well. And he's a real go-getter. He's self-made. As I said, started with being a mechanical engineer for other people. He now owns a contract manufacturing business and a semiconductor wafer manufacturing business. So all built up by himself. So has plants in the United States and in Sofia, Bulgaria. So he'd done quite well for himself. But really, we call him Crazy Man because the number one thing in Crossi's life really is amateur radio, and especially competitive contesting. So he has, if you don't know, he also has a very, very large station in Bulgaria. He has a contest station in Jamaica and 6Y1V, and also has one in the Azores, so which has been sort of dormant. And he said, well, I got to get back to those because I've been building this big station in Maine and I want to get back to those. But so the big dream was to be able to compete at a worldwide level in multi contesting. And not only does that take a lot of hardware, but it takes putting together a team and having a strategy and working on it. And there are, I can't describe to you how many antennas there are. I mean, there are beyond. It's beyond. It's probably the largest ham station in the world currently. I don't think there's anything quite as big. But with the bigness comes technology management and all those kinds of things. I'm a software engineer by trade, so I'm also very interested in how all that worked in the station. One of the, as a new op coming into the station, obviously you could be, even if you're an experienced contester, you could be intimidated by the amount of equipment there and the amount of things you can do. But what's very interesting, extremely interesting, is that they, through the software, through DXlog, and the people that wrote it, the original writer is now an SK, but the people who maintain it, they've boiled down hundreds of antennas and controls into a very simple user interface. So let me tell you what my job was in the contest operation. So planned long ago, I was the 80-meter in-band operator, and Mark, N50T from Oklahoma, was the 80-meter run operator. And perhaps those terms are not familiar to most contesters, but in this big time contesting in multi, you have a run operator whose only job is to run stations on a frequency. And even though we use packet and we're scanning the bands for other multipliers and QSOs, the run operator's job is not to do that. That we use in-band operators. And what are in-band operators? They're operators that are on the same band as you and can only transmit when you're not transmitting. So the logic in the station, all engineered by Velimir K3JO, interlocks everything. So for example, on 10 meters, they probably have a selection of somewhere between 15 and 25 antennas. And they have 3 in-band operators plus 1 run operator. So, and to give you an idea, we made 7,300 contacts in the contest on the run radios and 3,800 on the in-band radios. So those in-band operators are extremely important, especially for the multiplier count. Now, I thought 3 in-band operators on 10 meters, I'll get on and do some of that when I wasn't on 80. And see how it goes. And I was thinking I was going to sit there for hours and never get a cue in edgewise. It's not the way it works. The typical CQ is very short, and then there's a pause of 3 seconds. And in that pause of 3 seconds, any one of the 3 in-band operators can transmit. And on the screen in front of you is a interlock that a little banner that says radio. And if the interlock is red, it means that somebody else is transmitting. And if it's green, then you can go. So you don't even have to talk to them. As a matter of fact, it's a 28-acre campus at K1LZ. And to keep interference at a minimum, the in-band towers and operator shack, you have to get to by car. You can't walk to it. It's too far away. So you drive in your car, you get up, they use container buildings for these shacks, and they're all insulated and heated. Matter of fact, it was 78 degrees Fahrenheit during the contest, so quite warm in the shack. But so you're on the in-band radio, and I spent a good part of my time on the in-band radio, and I couldn't even hear Mark, the main 80-meter run station, when he was on. There's enough isolation that unless I was right on his same frequency, I couldn't even hear him. We did trade roles. Some people would think, oh, well, I don't want to be an in-band guy all the time and just run around an S&P. I want to be able to run. Well, of course we did that. You get tired of doing either thing, so it's good to trade off. So at my 80-meter in-band position, I had a 3-element wire beam at 190 feet. That was my main transmit receive antenna. And he has a high Z 8-circle receive antenna on 80 meters. I could use that, or I could use a series of beverages in the in-band. Mark, on the run station, has a 5-element wire beam at 270 feet on Europe, fixed on Europe. And then a full-size 4-square, transmit 4-square on a salt marsh. Again, he can use anybody can share receive antennas, so he could receive on the same antennas as me. So that gives you some of the idea of the scale and the work that's involved in being a multi.
Gerry, who designed that station? I mean, obviously, just what you've described on 80 meters is pretty intense. How many people were involved with conceiving of it? I'm sure Crossy was very involved, but there must have been some very skilled amateur radio operators that all contributed to that plan on 28
Very
acres.
well. So do you remember the show MacGyver?
Sure.
Sure. Okay. Well, Velimir K3JO is MacGyver. He's a MacGyver type. He's also the chief engineer of Crossy's business. So he's very, very, very involved. The RF switching matrix at K1LZ is 1,600 relays. There's 1,600 relays. And from any one of 13 operating positions, you can essentially get to everything else. So you can sit down at any one of the main positions and operate on any band on any antenna. And that's Velamir's design, completely his design. The antenna designs are all homebrew, and that was Krasy, and I can't remember his call. He has another friend from Russia who helped him do some of the design. But there are no, as far as I know, there are no commercial antennas on the property. It's all homebrew designs. So, for example, on 20 meters, it's the European antenna fixed is on long boom Yagis 6/6/6/6/6/6. So puts out a really good signal on 20 meters.
So, Gerry, with a station that complex, and I apologize for not knowing the answer to this. I've only been back in ham radio for a couple of years. But with something that complex, what kind of training is involved when you bring an operator from Indiana or around the world to learn how to run that?
Let me talk a little bit about that, because that's quite important. When you have a station of this complexity, and your goal is to be the top of the world, it's not a station that just every Joe Ham can come in and operate. You have to have some experience at contesting or have some level of reputation to get invited. I mean, that's just kind of how it is. Now there is, and another very, very good friend of mine, and I don't know if you've ever spoke with him, but that's Dave Robbins, K1TTT, out in Western Massachusetts. Dave has a very nice multi, and his only requirement to operate there is that you present an amateur radio license. So if you do that, and you can operate multi on 160 through 10 and have a great time. At Krasy Station, it's pretty much vetted crew. It's vetted crew. So in other words, they're familiar with the particular logging software that you're using, DX log. And they may have been invited for a particular skill, like they're a really fast runner or they're absolute magic multiplier hunter, or different skills. And another part of it is, of course, the mix of the people. Everybody has to get along. And what I say in contesting is, you'll forget the details of the contest, but you'll never forget the people you're with. So it was interesting. Two Canadian friends of mine came down from Ontario, and there are big ham stations in Canada, but nothing at this scale. So when they arrived, and the two of them were going to operate 20 meters, their eyes are popping out of their head and pretty intimidated at what's there. Well, we knew their skills. They rose to the occasion and they did extremely well. So you have to kind of take all that with a grain of salt. As you go along in contesting, you kind of get to know where you are, and you kind of rate yourself with other guys, and you feel comfortable in this realm. It would be a disservice to a sort of total newbie contester bringing them into this environment, because I think they would be intimidated not only by the technology, but by the people around them.
So, Gerry, like I said when we started the conversation, you just finished a contest, the CQWWCW. Can you tell me who was on that team?
The K1LZ operators were K1LZ, Jeff, K1ZM, who's used to be VY2ZM until he sold his property, Mr. 160, Velamir, K3JO. There were KC1TEK, KC1TEN, and KC1TQW, which sounds like newbie calls, but they are all people from Bulgaria who took their U.S. exams so they could operate at a U.S. station. And I don't have the translation of what they're, but all top-notch operators from there. Also AC1NU, another one of them. My good friend, Lars, KE1J, who's from Rhode Island, and I've operated with many, many times before. John, KL2A, who's been a contester for decades, has many records. It was an ex-WRTC guy. When I operated the VP6A and E51D the expeditions remotely, he was one of my CW crew when we operated CW. K08SCA is a call you will know, who has been, who went to Bouvet and many other places. Go ahead, I think you interviewed him already. Mark, yeah. So Mark N50T from Oklahoma, who I met when I was in Dayton, and we shared a room. That's when I first met him. But one of the great things when you operate a contest, you have time to talk, and we caught up over many years of talks. And he was licensed just about the same time I was in '75, and we were both traffic handlers at a high level. He was on Transcontinental Corps, and I did EAN and 4RN and all that stuff. So very cool. Jeff N6GQ, who was remote from California, and VE3EY and VE3JM. That's Yuri and Nick. Nick is VE3JY and VE3JM is Yuri, and they were the guys that came down from Canada and were blown away. But absolutely, if you look on 20 meters, they did 25, 29 QSOs, 39 zones, 144 countries. W1ADE is another one of the guys from Europe, who that's his US call, and myself. So that was the team. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 16 ops. 16 ops. And so, which brings me to a subject that I wanted to talk to you about, which is fun, is that in 1998, I invented the online scoreboard. So my first website was called getscores.org, and that was the first time you could post your scores live during a contest. And with work and everything else, I had to give it up. I'm trying to find you. I lost my screen here. Oh, there you are. Okay. It was really exciting. It added another sort of avenue to the excitement in amateur radio. But the big thing was a lot of guys weren't participating, and especially in the multi classes. And why is that? Well, some of them thought that giving away where you're making QSOs or where you're making multipliers might be giving away information about what bands you're going to. But I was extremely happy that, and in the last few contests, K3LR and of course K1LZ, we were posting our score in real time. And I can't tell you the number of people that texted me or emailed me and said, we were having as much fun watching the scoreboard as we were operating the contest. Well, let me tell you, each of the monitors at each operating position in K1, there's 2 monitors at each operating position. One of those monitors had the scoreboard on it all the time. So we were looking, but there was a surprise. Matt, KC1XX in southwestern New Hampshire, had put together a world-class multi team as well. I think 6 of the ops were from Germany and a bunch of guys from the US. One guy from Canada. Well, contest ended. First thing we're doing, of course, Matt and Krassi are good friends. First thing you do, jump on the phone. How'd you do? Because Matt didn't post his score on the scoreboard, and we didn't know what he was doing. Well, it's the closest multi score in history. We beat them by 30,000 points out of 30 million. It's crazy. It's crazy. And what the team said to each other was, it'll get, the UBN will adjudicate the score, but it doesn't matter. We showed each other that we can perform at an extremely high level, and we're happy. We're all happy.
So Gerry, let's talk more about the contest scoreboard, because that really intrigues me. What do you think the future is with that? Do you think that there will be more adoption and more people using it in the future?
I do. I really do. I think that that it's become incredibly.
What will it take to encourage people to do that? Do you think it's just time?
Some of it is time. There are many discussions, and this is getting young people interested in amateur radio contesting. you tell them that, oh yeah, you're in a contest, it's intense for 48 hours, and then you wait a year to find out who won. That doesn't go over really well. Actually, a lot of people look at the scoreboard as, hey, when that's done, that's how I did. It may vary. You may, if it's a very, very tight score, you may lose by UBN, but you pretty much know. So it's become very popular, especially with single ops and multi singles. The multi guys are catching on. K1TTT was one of the guys who worked with me on it years ago, so he's been posting forever. K3LR has come on board. It's great, and of course LZ will keep doing it. There's been many years of talk about turning the scoreboard into real-time adjudication. In other words, requiring you to participate, and then putting that to an adjudication server. And so, say 10 hours after the end of the contest, there's the actual results. That really hasn't gone anywhere. Not yet. Ward Silver wrote an article about it in NCJ, I believe, quite a few years ago. And, talked about, hey, maybe we can invent contests within a contest and, have some different kind, team overlays or all kinds of different ideas, geography overlays. So there's lots of interest in moving it into another sort of realm, but I think it has to catch on with the core contesting crowd.
So is it a software programming issue, or is it simply people buying into it?
I think a lot of it is people buying into it. So what's interesting is all the modern loggers that we use in contests have XML data that gets broadcast on your network. And what the online scoreboard piece does is just capture that and then send it up to a server. So that's trivial, connecting that piece. As a matter of fact, versions of this is what was used at WRTC for their live scoring application. So the technology piece is quite easy. It's more about, there's software to be written. There's people that would have to sponsor it. There's, it's probably too big for one or two people to do it as a freebie, but it could be done, and I certainly hope it does, because the thrill we got out of this real time watching each other, especially on 80 meters. I would watch K3LR would find two more multipliers on 80. And we'd be motivated. Let's go find, who can we find, and we'd find three more and be ahead of them. And then at the very end, they leapfrogged us and they beat us by a couple of multipliers, but we beat them by 80 QSOs. So it was interesting.
So Gerry, you mentioned possibly requiring operators to use it. Do you think people would go along with that rule if there was a specific contest and it was a requirement that you use with the online scoreboard, or would people revolt?
Not at scale. Not at scale. I don't think anybody would want to do this in CQ Worldwide or ARRL DX, but certainly in smaller contests, I think it's a go. I'm a member of CW Ops, and I've talked with the management team at CW Ops, and they said, "Yep, we do it for sure." And that's the kind of place to start it, right? And once you have people doing it there and seeing that it works, then there's the possibility. But I think we're a long way away from having a worldwide or ARRL DX doing it.
That makes sense. Start small, get people comfortable with it, get all the bugs worked out, then move on.
What has really changed, over the last decade is sort of ubiquitous in internet access. And that was a worry for this real-time stuff. You can be in parts of the world where there just isn't any internet access, but with good Starlink access now, that's a possibility anywhere.
So Gerry, I'm cognizant of the time and how much time you've got for this conversation. I'd like to do somewhat of a speed round and just touch upon some subjects really quickly and get your thoughts. One of the things that I've been very intrigued about is the WRTC, and you've been to the WRTC at least once, maybe more. Tell me about your WRTC experience. How many times?
3 times. 2 times as a ref and 1 time just as a visitor. So there's a funny thing. People that are not involved in contesting think that contesters are not social people because we make 10-second or 5-second QSOs and we move on. But the problem is, like any other hobby or subset of a hobby, we're intensely into what we do. So going to WRTC is like part of it is fandom. You're going to see all those guys that you worked all around the world who are just the most incredible contesters you could ever see. And it's Dayton on steroids. Not as many people, but boy, are they great people. Guys who I had when I was 17. I used to exchange contest information, talk about the contest with a ham in Yugoslavia. And at the second WRTC I went to in Germany, I got to meet him for the first time in my life. So that was a really incredible experience. And lots of stories like that. I got involved in WRTC because I was involved in remote. And I thought it would be, and remote was kind of, when we had WRTC in Boston, remote was kind of nascent. There wasn't a zillion guys doing it yet. And I thought, what a great opportunity to show contesters that you can contest remotely and it really works. So I talked with the WRTC headquarters people, and in Boston we set up 6 remote stations. We had SK3W in Sweden, we had PR1T in Brazil, we had VY1AAA in the Yukon, W7RN, so stations from all over, and contesters were blown away when people that were visiting, guys that weren't operating WRTC, operated the contest remotely from those locations during the IARU contest. It was kind of neat sitting at SK3W and reaching over to PR1T in Brazil, said, "Hey, I'm going to call you in a minute," for the multiplier.
Which brings me to the next subject. Remote ham radio is obviously taking a hold. More and more people are having trouble putting up antennas and towers in their backyards. So I think they're being more and more intrigued by companies like Remote Ham Radio, W2RE. What do you think the future for ham radio contesting is remote?
Oh, I think it has a very bright future. There are a lot of commercial, not commercial in the sense of a remote ham radio, but a lot of commercial hardware to allow you to do remote today. But what I've been working on for the last year is coming up with extremely simple but very competitive ways to do remote contesting. We could talk about it at another time, but essentially, with somebody with a decent internet connection and normal radios, it doesn't have to be anything special. I can, and as long as you got a DSL connection with decent speed, I can put remote in half an hour and it'll be fully functional, and everything that you had in the station, you should be able to use over remote. So, for example, this weekend I'm going to be operating as ZF2VE from ZF9CW in Cayman Islands. Now, I got involved with Stan, K5GO, the owner, because a friend of mine wanted to operate remote there and had no idea, and neither did Stan, how to set up remote. We set up that remote in one evening, and we've been running it ever since. And we won quite a few contests from there using that remotely.
So, Gerry, you obviously hang out with a lot of serious contesters. You know them by name. They're probably your friends. What's the biggest negative that you hear from that group about remote contesting?
So the only negative, and I hear this often, but I also hear 100% the other way, is from people where you're intruding on their territory, right? So somebody has an established, I got the record from here, and or my part of the world is tough and it's really hard to get to, and in order to be able to compete here, you got to come up here and do it yourself. And I can understand that. I completely understand that. But where remote contesting really shines is actually swinging back to talking about multi-operator. One of the issues today is people can't get to the stations. And a lot of this started because of COVID, right? They didn't want people in the station because of COVID. But once we got remote going, they said, hey, if, so-and-so can't show up and operate at the desk, but he can operate from home, I know he's a great op, let's get it running on remote. So there are tons of hybrid stations now, as K1LZ was, and this can be very effective. But as I said earlier, part of contesting is the human interaction, is the sharing of information and all of that. So I'm really concerned about and trying to help people understand how to communicate outside of on the radio, right? How do I communicate with my fellow operators so I'm not some guy on the other side of the world off by myself and not part of the team? And there are ways to do that.
Well, tell me more about that. I don't want to get too stuck on this, but it really intrigues me because at K1LZ, you brought everybody together, but they could have operated remotely. You didn't have to bring people from around the world. So why did you choose to bring them to Jonesport, Maine for that particular contest?
Well, because especially Crassie believes that side by side it's better. There's more communication. Now, I'm a technologist, so I think that those problems can be solved with technology, right? Multi-channel audio that I do, like with something called Mumble, and you can have audio channels where operators can talk to each other if they're remote and local, things like that. There are ways to integrate so that they're there. They're not there in person, but they're there. Now, as I said, 3 or 4 of the operators at LZ were remote, so they were talking usually over text chat, and talking back and forth. But in person is always better, but that doesn't mean you can't do it hybrid and do just as well.
Well, I love how you're pushing the edges because you're right. It's not until you start looking at the solution. If you're not looking for it, you won't find it. So you're on the right path. Different subject. De-expeditions to Canada. I haven't seen anybody with so many Canadian call signs under your belt. I know you are Canadian. You're from Halifax. Tell me about getting a license in Canada and that specific interest in operating in Canada. Okay,
so the many call signs has a very practical purpose. In Canada, you can only get a call sign in the area that you're operating, right? So if you're in VE1 and you go to VE2, you actually have to sign VE1 portable VE2. You have to sign the portable. That's part of our requirement. But that doesn't mean you can't have more than one call sign. And in Canada, you pass an operator certificate. Once you have a certificate, then you can have as many call signs as you want. So I just hate operating portable. When I operate portable, I want to have a call sign for that part of the world. And so a bunch of my Canadian friends tease me that I'm the master of all these call signs. But so getting a license in Canada, this is really important. It's kind of changed. So first of all, anybody in the world can get a Canadian license. You just have to pass the exam. You used to have to go to Canada to take the test, but since COVID, they start and it's volunteer examiners, just like the U.S. The volunteer examiners can give you the test over Zoom. So interestingly enough, when I was walking in Dayton this year, my good friend Jim N3JT, who's a retired FCC engineer, said, "Hey, can I get a Canadian license? I'd like to operate from VY1AAA." And I said, sure. So we got him all hooked up. He passed both his amateur and his advanced amateur, the 2 classes of licenses. In order to operate any station remotely in Canada, you have to have an advanced amateur license. So anyway, Jim got them, and he's VY1JT now. And he's operated from VY1AAA remotely.
So what does that exam look like for an advanced amateur in Canada? Would that be the equivalent of an extra?
Yeah, it's pretty equivalent. It's a multiple choice test. It has sort of, some of them are a bit different, but I think no harder than a U.S. extra.
So when you're operating in Canada, what are you taking for gear? What are you setting up?
Most of my operations are either remote to somebody else's station, or I go to their station and operate. And one of my stories is I have a bucket list item in my life. I want to operate the sweepstakes contest from as many sections as I can before I die. So I've operated from Newfoundland. I was there in person at a friend's station. I did Nova Scotia was a new section this year in sweepstakes, and I didn't have a place to operate, but I knew a ham who had a real nice station with a K4. And I called him up and said, "What's your internet connection?" And within half an hour, I had the station running remotely. So, and it worked well, did very well. So, and I've gone in Ontario and Quebec and haven't been to some in the Prairie province. Well, VE4, I have good friends in Winnipeg, and so I've operated some remote stations there. And no BC yet, but I'll get there eventually.
So you've mentioned twice now that you were able to set up a remote station within a half an hour. I don't know if that's an exaggeration, but let's stick with the one you just mentioned. How did you do that within a half an hour?
To give you the quick synopsis. So first of all, I made sure that he had a good internet connection. Then I asked about what does he have for automation on his desktop? What applications does he have that he controls on his desktop? He happened to have an Elecraft K4, a KPA 500 amplifier, the KTA tuner. All those applications have desktop applications that allow you to control them. He didn't have them installed, so I installed them all. So there I had a full view of his station over any desk, so over a remote desktop. I had a full view of his station. The only criteria now is how do I do audio? So, and this is kind of something that I discovered over the past couple of years. Real-time gamers use something called Mumble. And Mumble is an open source audio server and client that has extremely low latency, very low, because in an online game, you can die if you have a high latency, literally, you get shot before the other guy. So I actually have many Mumble servers running around the world. The one I have in New York City is 10 milliseconds from my house in New Hampshire. It was 20 milliseconds from my friend's place in Nova Scotia. So what you do is you have a Mumble client at his place and a Mumble client at my place, and we talk to each other, and you route through the sound card in the PC, and away you go. There's the audio. It's so low latency that you can run 40 words per minute CW and have no issues.
So I guarantee you we're going to come back and we're going to talk more about that on our next conversation. Because as you know,
we can do a whole session on that.
Absolutely. And as you know, I've co-purchased a remote station in northern Maine, so the topic intrigues me a great deal. But moving on to other subjects, Radio-in-a-Box, RIB.
Yes.
This is something I think you're passionate about. Tell me more about how that got started and what you've done with it.
Well, I haven't done with it. I operated it a lot, but I learned a lot about it. So the Northern California DX Foundation and AA7JV, George was actually the inventor of the Radio-in-a-Box. And the Radio-in-a-Box is essentially radios, power supplies, everything wired together so that and it very, very detailed power supply work with, multi-farad capacitors and all this kind of thing, so that you still have generators, but when the generators start up, they have a consistent load. It doesn't, it's really hard on generators to not have a consistent load, and you run into troubles. So anyway, they built these for the sole purpose, the real purpose they designed them for, was there are many places in the world where governments don't want a lot of people treading on the land. And the idea was to be very, very limited footprint on the land. So what they did was they put all these radios in a box. And right now they're flex radios. And flex runs over IP. So how do you operate these radios? So George has a very large yacht, and he would park the yacht offshore of whatever particular location we're going to, and there's a wireless LAN between the rib and the yacht. So the actual operating positions are in the yacht. Okay, so you have all these operators that don't have to go on land. Now, the reason I got involved in this was because, well, not only did George want operators from the yacht, he wanted operators from the world, around the world, to be able to operate the DXpedition. In their previous trials using Starlink, they could only do FT8. And, that worked okay, pretty well. He wanted to try CW. Well, with the technique that they were using to route audio, the latency was too high. It was really too high. Well, again, within an evening or two, I had hooked them all up with Mumble, and CW was not only possible. We made, I don't know, if you count the two operations, maybe 50,000 CW QSOs remotely. And we started to do SSB, which is possible, but there's some limitations in the hardware that we didn't understand as much, and so we didn't have as much opportunity to do sideband. But since then, I've done lots of operating with Starlink on SSB, and it still works just fine. So here's the cool thing about the RIB. It's going to expand DXing. It's going to allow more people. There are DXers around the world who are high on the honor list, but have never been part of a DXpedition. And this potentially gives them the opportunity to be part of that. And not only is that a thrill, but you learn what the other side is like, because it's extremely hard. The DXpeditions are harder than contests. The pileups are just intense. NED, AA7JV, who's part of NCDXF management, was one of the guys who worked on the RIB as well. He has a very interesting idea for the RIB, and it came out of our one of our DXpedition operations. One of our operators who did remote was Steve, N2IC. Well, Steve's retired, but what is he? He's a communications commander for fires, for fire zones. Well, Ned and I were thinking, wouldn't it be really cool to fill that RIB with not only amateur radio and internet equipment, but with fire radios, with Mumble being able to connect all the audio channels and allow and have amateur radio clubs drop one in an incident and allow them instant communications everywhere. And this is something that amateur radio could do that a commercial company would never do, because one of the reasons is it would be too expensive, right? But this is something that ham radio can do. So I think the RIB has lots of legs.
Another subject. I was interested in reading
Yes.
the QRZ page and learning that you're also a writer, that you have written for the National Contest Journal. You've contributed to the ARRL handbook. You've edited some of the technical articles for QST. Tell me about that. How did you get involved with writing amongst everything else that you do?
Yeah, well, through one great man who's now an SK. So I, in 1980, I worked in broadcasting first, engineering, and then that was, in the rock and roll 70s, and it was didn't make any money, but it was a lot of fun. But then I had an opportunity. There was an opening at the league at ARRL headquarters in the lab. And so I got a job working in the lab at ARRL and built a bunch of projects that were in the handbook, and of course helped edit stuff about that. But then the master of radio, Doug DeMaw, W1FB, who wrote many, many books for the league, was my boss. And he says, "Gerry, I want you to write." And I said, "Doug, I don't have any experience writing." He says, "Don't worry, we'll teach you." There was another very interesting, funny. One of the senior editor of QST was a guy named, is still around, Gerry Hull. Gerry, Jerryhall, almost exactly the same name. K1TD, who was my boss. We would always get each other's phone calls because we had a overhead pager in the league at that time. And Penny, the receptionist, had a southern drawl, so she'd say, "There's a call for Gerry Hull." We didn't know who it was for. But anyway, the editorial team at QST were a great bunch of guys. And the first couple of articles I wrote or edited, there were more ink on the paper than typewriter ink. but I learned a lot. And I actually, for about the first 15 years after I left the league, I worked as a technical writer. So did a lot of technical writing, but I was in a startup and they needed engineering more than they needed tech writing. So I ended up switching careers.
So a perfect segue to the ARRL and some of the changes that the ARRL is making with QST. What are your thoughts about that, the direction that the ARRL is taking in general and specifically regarding QST?
Well, I mean, QST, it's a hard nut to crack. We have a lot of, so, we're talking about all this contesting and HF stuff. We're 0.1% of the population of amateur radio operators in the country. The majority of hams are techs. They're what I would call, and not as a derogatory term, utility operators. They still very much are part of ham radio, but they're not using radio because of radio. They're usually fishermen or they're hikers or they're involved in something else, but they understand the value of having a ham license and being able to use, all the frequencies and the technology that we have. But and by the way, I'm a life member of the league, very, very pro ARRL. Now, dues increase. Well, that's part of life. I don't think there's a club that you could belong to or a magazine that you could get in the country that doesn't have dues increases. And that's an issue for some people. But serving the audience is the nut that the league has to crack. And I don't know how we do that. But there's been lots of talk about maybe no QST and many newsletters, sort of like the IEEE has different publications for different areas of interest. And the thing is, being one magazine for all of ham radio is extremely difficult. We've got NCJ for contesters. We have QEX, but I mean, I think there should be more material, not just the new ham radio magazine that's just new to ham radio, but more about how can they get the most out of the utilitarian hobby. We can still support them. We don't have to teach them all kinds of tech, but we want them in the fold because we have this, we have our spectrum because we're supposed to be trained radio operators in order to help when we need to give help. And we're not counting that other 99.5% of hams that are valuable. And that's what I worry about.
Gerry, final subject, the YCCC, Yankee Clipper Contest Club. You and I are both members. I'm a new member. I don't really know the club like you do. You've been involved for a long time. Tell me about the YCCC.
It's one of the biggies. It's one of the three big clubs in the country. If you look at the who's who history of the club, some of the biggest events in amateur radio contesting, I mean, people and products and technologies and antennas were all people that were in YCCC. You wouldn't have Packet Cluster without AK1A, who was a member. Kenny K1EA, and who isn't active anymore, but did CT, which was the first real contest logging program, and many of the other designs came out of that. N1MM is a club member, and of course with his very, very popular logging program. So it's a very a lot of the guys are getting older, but it's a very, very rich. Our reflector is just, full of information if you want to know. I mean, we've got many PhDs from MIT and, all this kind of stuff. So we have guys that know each subject in and out. So our main focus is the Big Four DX contests, but everybody, we submit scores for all the other ones, but those are what we concentrate on. And we don't believe in, you can only be submit a huge score if you want to submit a score. Any score matters. All scores matter. If you make 5K points, or if you make 100 QSOs, it all counts. So we invite people to join and participate.
Gerry, thank you for humoring me going through those topics. There's plenty to talk about in the future. I really appreciate you taking the time today. I've taken enough time out of your evening tonight. Thank you for joining me.
No, thank you for having me, and enjoyed speaking with you.
I've been talking to Gerry Hull, W1VE. I can guarantee you'll hear him on the air at any contest, but he's also a wealth of knowledge in a lot of other subjects. Thanks again, Gerry.
You're welcome.